Good evening. My name is Hal Gage. Welcome to the third First Monday art presentations. The format for tonight is, as it is every Monday, four presenting artists share their work for 15 minutes. I started this event as a way to reconnect after this long isolation with my fellow artists, share work and ideas. If you or someone you know would like to present, please have them drop me an email at halgage@alaska.net. It's not a traditional type Zoom meeting, but rather a live presentation by four artists. Please keep your mics muted for the duration of the presentations. At the end, I'll open it up for questions. You can unmute yourself and ask your questions. If you're like me and you have a good memory, but it's short, I'd recommend that you type your questions into the chat window while you're thinking of it, and I'll review them at the end. So for tonight, our first presenter is going to be Gail Neufeld. She's a photographer living in Anchorage, Alaska. Her work covers a wide variety of subjects and genre. Tonight, Gail is going to show us a few images that she's been working on. So you with us, Gail?
Yep. I, over the last year, have done a little bit of catching up on processing, if there's such a thing. And it turns out that I have a lot of glacier images. So last week I decided to do a cohesive show on my glacier images. So one of the things I like about photographing the glaciers is that there's many different ways you can photograph them. There's the landscape size, which is, just trying to fit the whole thing in. And this is nice. I like them, but you really don't get a sense of how impressive I feel that the glacier is. So this is Portage. This is going to be a mixture of Portage Glacier and Matanuska Glacier. But these large scale landscapes that you can. There's just so much you can do. So after the landscapes, there's big blocks of ice that you can just photograph. Trying to let the slideshow catch up with me here. And again, these I really like the big blocks of ice. They're they're big blocks of ice is about what I can say about them. Not necessarily my favorite part of taking of the glacier photos. The interesting thing about it is they look so different depending on the lighting. Shades of blue are different, how much blue you see. What the clouds are like. I like a good dramatic cloud. And then you can just take photos of walls of ice. And these are different than I categorize them differently because it's just this, this wall of ice. And the lines in them make them a little bit more interesting. So the crossed line just leading you into the photo. Diagonal lines. the reflections with the circular lines. I really like this one. And then just a wall of blue ice. Again, with the dramatic clouds, I just think they add so much to a photo. Ice eruptions, that's something I call when the ice structures look like they've just erupted out of the layer of ice below them. So these I like because they have interesting lighting effects. They're different. That blue looks, the ice actually looks almost translucent with some of them. They're tough though because the background can get in the way a little bit, and it's hard to get that bokeh background and still have the entire ice in focus. Playing with some of the shapes that are in the ice from water action or calving. Curves are kind of fun. I like curvy lines. And of course, everybody likes the ice tunnels or ice caves. From a little bit of a distance, and then getting into them is fun. One of the things I've noticed about as I've been processing these is it's the blue is really hard to get right. It's very easy to oversaturate, very easy to just get the color off a little bit. I'm still working on that on many of these. And this one is just looking up from an ice cave at a hole in the top where the light is coming down. Same tunnel looking opposite directions from where I'm standing. This one and the last one. And then anybody who's been out on the glacier with me knows that I like to take pictures of the holes in the ice. And typically those are small. And like this one, I actually have my camera on the lens hood on the ice. The lens hood is on the ice. This one is only, this hole is only a couple inches big, but if you fill the frame with it, you really can't tell that. And most of these are small. And sometimes when there's the rocks in them, you can tell that they are small. I like the ones better without any anything in it to provide scale. Sometimes they can look quite abstract, which I kind of like that. This actually should have been under the ice caves, but I got it in the wrong order. Sorry about that. I like the way the snow is on the outsides of this kind of puffy, powdery kind of thing. So the other thing I've been experimenting with is making these into black and white. Sometimes the blue is just it just doesn't work in color, and I think the black and white is more dramatic. This one, they're just the blacks just didn't show up as well with the blue. This is one that I showed earlier under Walls of Ice, and I actually like it better in black and white. Just none of these worked in color. Some of these you may recognize from some of the either Alaska Wild or Rarefied Light. A few of them have been in one of those shows. This one had a bright blue sky behind it, so it just took away from the icicles. But I like the way it looks in black and white. And then sometimes you just find some photos, something to make a picture of that's just kind of fun. Like this one that's coming up is kind of a, not quite, but a little bit of a mirror image between the mountain and the chunk of ice sticking up. And this next one, a few of us took this. We were out together. We call it the Wizard. And then sometimes you just get tired of all the blue and the white, and you have to add a little bit of different color. And that is it.
Our next presenter is Javid. Are you ready to go, Javid?
I am.
Okay, so go ahead and screen share.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And Gail, that was wonderful. These are incredible images, and thanks for sharing. And I think at the cost of my own presentation, I need to say a few words. First of all, thank you for putting together this forum. It's incredible to have so many wonderful artists and wonderful people, friends that we know face-to-face from workshops to see in this forum. But Hal has been my mentor. He's a wonderful photographer with international awards. He's one of the few people who also teaches just as good as a photographer, and he's helped me with my projects. He's just an email away. So thank you for doing this. And if it wasn't for Hal, I would not have done this project. I can tell you for sure. He put some fire under my rear to get this done, but thank you. So the project that I'm talking about is very unique, and Hal introduced me as a physician and a photographer, and I live in two different worlds. I have two different hats. One of them is a physician, which is a very, very concrete world that I cannot deviate from, very, very strict rules, and the other one is the photographer, the artist that wants to get out of the box and create and improvise and break the rules as much as I can. And I usually don't let these two worlds touch each other because I can't afford to have my inspiration and creative ideas at work. So this project is very unique because this is the first time I'm uniting these two worlds together. And the reason for that is and I get back to that because I feel like it's an obligation to share some of the things that are happening right now in our world, in the whole world, not only in our communities. Mm-hmm. And I can say for sure that this pandemic has touched every single one of us. Our lives have been impacted more or less by this pandemic in different ways. And the fact that we're actually in a Zoom meeting is probably one reason, but we have had some stories in a very negative way. And the reason I started this project is to share what is happening in a real world called the intensive care unit. That's where I spend most of my time. That has been my home. I spend a third of my life in that tiny little place over the last 14 years. And what's happening outside, an outside world that is convoluted, mixed with facts, truth, lies, conspiracy theories, agenda to disturb what is really happening. And I'm hoping with this project, I will have an impact to at least save one life, at least save one hospitalization. And this is a very, very time sensitive and a project that is dear to my heart. And I know you guys wanted to see a lot of pictures, and let me break this to you, and it's coming up. Unfortunately, I hit a roadblock. So I started talking to our media department, and they told me I cannot take any pictures in the hospital. And that kind of broke my heart, but I've tried to improvise and do something in my studio or outside, so you will show that. So with no further ado, I'm going to start some of the presentation. I'm going to skip this one, which is kind of distracting, but this project, it's important to talk about the pictures, but I think the pictures are just part of the picture. The big picture is a project that tries to offer a glimpse of what's happening in real life and contrast it with what's going on outside. This project checks many boxes for me, but I want to focus on one thing. Boxes include, again, show what healthcare providers are going through. It's been a tough year and a couple of months for all of us. And I'm sure you hear on the news that a third of the healthcare providers are considering quitting their jobs. 40% of the nurses, ICU nurses, exhibit some signs of depression. And that's big, depression and PTSD. So, but the one box that I check, and I want to highlight that, is to, again, show what's happening in real world. The other thing that I want to show that these are facts. The pictures are recreation of some factual stories, every single one of them, and I can prove that. And they may seem far-fetched and sometimes unrealistic, but they are exactly what's happening to me. And actually, not only me, my colleagues, and also I studied in Austria, and I have connection with European colleagues that have gone through much worse time than us. And they share some of their stories with me that I'm going to present. And something I should tell you that the pictures alone, they don't hold up on each other on their own. They do need the stories to complete each other, to get a big picture of what's happening. And I told you about the roadblock, that I still haven't got a firm no. I haven't got a yes yet, but as soon as I get a firm no, if I get a firm no, I'm going to move up to plan B, C, and D, and I have come up with some ideas to create the images the best I can. The last thing I want to say about this project is that it's an ongoing project, and I would welcome any feedback that you guys can give me, because it's early stages, and this is a time-sensitive and impactful project that I'm hoping a lot of us can share, and I welcome anybody who wants to help in any form, including editing the stories that I have. And Mary is here. Mary has helped me a lot with my personal statement and some of them. The technical is not very important, but I think if I say what's going on, I think it's less distracting when we talk about the pictures and their stories. They are not, it's not a photojournalism. They're not, I can't take my camera and do patient care at the same time as taking photograph. It's just not gonna happen. I can't justify that. It's not ethical. So I have tried to do some recreation of that in a more abstract way. And I use Lens Baby. It may sound weird, but I think it helps in several ways. First of all, it focuses on the subject only and makes everything else blurry, which is helps not to be distracted with some of the details, like what is the name of the patient, what's that drug that is being administered, etc. And also, people who work with sick patients, they know what delirium is. Delirium is fluctuation of cognition, and it's reversible. But patients who report back, they say everything looks so blurry, which is kind of what the patients see when they're so sick. And the other thing is, I have a lot of heavy stories that I had to ask my colleagues to stop because I couldn't take it. And most of them are my friends' stories when they said that. So I have to mix it up with some more cheerful, I call them silly little things that really, really matter with those heavy stuff. So it's not too much for the audience. And before I get started with the pictures, I just want to show you what happened. I wanted to present 12 pictures. I put them on the side. I wrote down the stories and ideas as a sticker. And I said, once I take a picture, I'll move them to the right. That's the check boxes. So I have 5 pictures. And the way I started to create that was what I want to photograph, how I want to photograph it, and where do I put the camera? 3 simple questions. And that's how how it started. And the title actually comes from Mary. It's in the belly of the beast, very creative, and that's actually what's happening. So the first picture is the one that I used for, oh, I forgot to set the timer. Sorry. If I'm going over time, please let me know. I think the best thing is that because the pictures are more complete with the stories, I thought I put the pictures out and tell you the story. It's only 2 paragraphs, but I think it tells everyone what it means. And this is the picture that I used as a poster, as a presentation. If I find it's called "Hold the Line," and the explanation gives a background for the. If I show this to an intensivist or an ICU nurse, they know exactly what I'm talking about. But I think a little bit of background would be helpful, and then it tells the story that goes with it. So I may just go over that. I'm guessing, and if I go over 50 minutes, I stop. Hold the line. The conditions of patients in the ICU can change in a moment, requiring shifting our focus from one life-saving intervention to another. The tools and the equipment we use to do so are complex, and one of the most frequent and time-consuming tasks we perform is adjusting the continuous infusion of multiple medications. The tubing and pumps used for these infusions resemble ropes holding critically ill patients above water. Traditionally, the necessary pumps and tubings are kept in the patient's rooms, but in a pandemic, this means that we must don and doff whenever we need to adjust their infusions. Instead, some of my creative colleagues came up with the idea to keep infusion pumps outside the rooms and add more tubing. Saving time and personal protective gear is a result of that. It forms a complex network of tubing system across the ICU and the patient room that resembles the ropes we throw in to prevent the patients from sinking. The more severe their condition, the more ropes they need. I think the most number of lines that I saw in a patient were 11, and 11 means the patient is really, really sick, and we stop every single one of them, they may die. Breaking point, I could not make a picture, but this is very important because this one affected me very personally, and that was the first patient that who I lost to COVID-19, and at that point the family members could not come to the bedside, so her nurse and I decided that we go in and hold her hands, and I'm going to make that picture as soon as I get permission to do that in an ICU room. This is one of those breathers, and I think it's a funny story to help deviate from those heavy stuff that coming up thick and fast. It's called Utterly Smooth, and everybody who knows this kind of cream, it's spelled Utterly, U-D-D-E-R-L-Y. Normal skin produces a thin layer of oil that protects it from irritation, cracks, and infection. Frequent use of alcohol disinfectants remove this layer, leaving us with dry, chapped skin. Soap and water are gentler, but often rubbing alcohol is the only option coming immediately out of an isolation room. And the story is, my hand went through a predictable cycle of physical trauma during the pandemic. After the 3rd or 4th day of my week-long rotation in the ICU, my hands started to crack and burn every time I used the alcohol rod. It took days off of work for them to heal, only to crack and burn again when I returned. In desperation, I slept many nights wearing gloves filled with all kinds of lotion and creams. What worked finally was a special cream used by one of my colleagues on her parents' farm to treat sores on their cows' udders. This one, this is my son, by the way, for the creation of this picture. But this is one of the heavier ones that I'm going to share. And I promise I'm not going to do any more heavy ones. if I find. The first wave of the pandemic paralyzed many healthcare systems around the world. Predominantly affected areas were staff, medications, and life-saving equipment, but no area was immune. One such area was dignified transfer of the deceased and disposal of their belongings. Because of the uncertainty around the modes of transmission of COVID-19, in some areas their belongings were generally not returned to the families, but rather treated as biohazard material and destroyed. And the story goes, according to a colleague of mine in Italy, the belongings of deceased patients would sit in biohazard bags placed in a container close to the staff entrance for pickup. Going to work in the morning or coming out late at night, occasionally he would hear a cell phone ring from outside of those bags. The ring of those unanswered calls in those bizarre circumstances is a sound he will never forget. This is, again, I'm not going to tell you the story because I think we're running out of time, but this is a story about watching one of our nurses going into a patient room when the patient's ventilator was disconnected and her oxygenation level was dropping so fast. And usually putting the equipment for me, it takes minutes. And she put her gown on and she tied her gown backwards in less than 3 seconds, and try to do it at home. Try to do something backwards without looking at it. It's really hard. It just means how often they've practiced this exercise to tie their gown backwards without looking at it. I want to finish with something more cheerful for a change. And it's called, I learned how to smize. Smize is a word that one of the celebrities apparently came up with. I was listening to NPR and they were saying it's an abbreviation for how to smile with eyes. I learned how to smize. It is lonely and terrifying to be critically ill with COVID-19. Isolated from their families, the human touch, and the voices of caring hospital staff, it's often the only thing positive memories that patients report after they recover. But we can smile. The masks we wear, unfortunately, a psychological barrier as well as a physical barrier. Instead of smiles, patients see the material reminders of their illness. The story goes, a respiratory therapist known for her cheerful and uplifting attitude over the years came to me with a solution. I don't know how to show my smile to my patients, she said. So I learned how to show my smile with my eyes. I realized I'd heard something similar from a radio show about a celebrity who invented the word smizing, smiling with eyes. It is a little thing that can mean the whole world. The last two slides I have is some kind of zooming out and looking at the big picture, how we can change the attitude of our community. Unfortunately, and again, I listen to NPR a lot. They were interviewing somebody who was saying that choosing a basic scientific and epidemiological interventions such as mask wearing or vaccination has become a tool to express our political affiliation. And if we do that, we all lose as a community, as a group. So I came up with the idea how to present the information I have from the ICU to other people. And I came up with two different approaches. The first one comes from a Persian poet in 1300s. And he was way ahead of his time. I mean, the first two lines is about what's actually going on with Black Lives Matter. And it goes, Adam's children are limbs of one body that in creation are made of one gem. When life and time hurt a limb, other limbs will not be at ease. You who are not sad for the suffering of others do not deserve to be called human. And I think it's very beautiful, but it's very judgmental, and I don't think it's going to work with a whole lot of communities. And you wouldn't believe who I'm going to choose with the next slide as the person who came up with the idea how to choose that. I could not imagine in my wildest dream that I quote something from a Republican pundit, and I highly recommend, if you're interested in this topic, to listen to This American Life, the episode 736, the second half of that, called The Herd. It's very powerful. And Frank Luntz had a personal story about the stroke that he had. So he gathered a bunch of similar-minded, like-minded people who are refusing to get vaccine. And he was able, at the end, to convince 50% of them to get a vaccine, at least what they claimed.
Javid,
yeah.
We're going to have to wrap it up here, please.
Yeah. And I finished with the last one, that life is precious, life is special. Let's do everything we can to preserve it. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for listening.
Presenter is going to be Myron Wright. He's a photographer in Anchorage, Alaska. He's both a fine art and commercial photographer. He's had 2 solo shows at the Anchorage Museum and 2 1% for art projects. His work has been reproduced in numerous books, posters, and calendars. A few of his commercial clients are Alaska Airlines, BP, Fed Alaska, and Raytheon. Tonight, Myron is going to show us a wide range of work that has kept him busy over the long COVID lockdown and his long career in photography.
Well, starting out, I'm a photographer. I'm not a computer nerd, so I apologize for that. And I've got 90 images here, so I wanted to just make this little statement. Everyone has different life experiences. The following 90 images are some of my observations of the beauty of the natural world and why we should appreciate and preserve it for those who come after us. So we're going to start out with a little project that I assigned myself 11 years ago, and that was to photograph a lone cottonwood tree along Turnagain Arm up above Beluga Point, and to watch it change through the seasons. So here's, we started out with late winter, spring, and here come the rest of the seasons. Summer is not my favorite. As you can see, the colors blend and there's not much variety. However, in autumn, the magic begins. My favorite season, which starts up in northern Alaska in the Brooks Range in August, and then comes down to us along sea level here, extending into early October. And then we lose our leaves and transition into winter. Another magical time, especially during this transition phase. And back to early spring again. So I'm going to jump to something a little unusual, something that not many people engage in, and that's photomicrography. I tried this back in the film days and found that it was very laborious, trying to figure exposures, color balance, waiting for the film to be processed at Castleton's or Keller's, waiting a day to get the film back, and there was too much of a time lag. But now doing it with digital, it's like a new world has opened up. You can see immediately the results. You can fine tune what you want to get. And I'm using this apparatus. It's a 1970s, 80s vintage Nikon microscope. It's a polarizing microscope, normally used for looking at thin sliced minerals in a field called petrography. But it's fun to play with also with vitamin C crystals and various other chemical crystals to achieve really psychedelic colors and forms, and just one can become immersed in this. In fact, I spent the entire month of February back at the beginning of COVID dealing with these colors, patterns, textures, shapes, forms, some of which are totally out of this world, and others it's fun to relate to the real world. This one I call Infant's Delight, or maybe mammary madness. At any rate, you get the point. So here we've got geometric structures. Looks like a satellite view of a mountain, a couple of mountains maybe. Abstract forms, colors, shapes. Same thing, just by twisting the polarizer, you get different juxtapositions of color. This one I call Picasso's head, and I think you can see why. So we leave the microscopic world now and go outdoors. Along Turnagain Arm on a windy day, lenticular clouds backlit by the sun, and a totally mesmerizing scene. I took a 60-degree panorama of the sky, and there was nothing uninteresting in the entire panorama. This is just a very small segment of that scene. Of course, clouds can be threatening also. Here's a building thunderstorm along the Eklutna tail race on the Knik River. Cirrus clouds up in the northern Alaska range along the Richardson Highway. They're also called mare's tails, colloquially. More lenticulars, cirrus and cumulus. Of course, cirrus crystals or cirrus clouds are composed of ice crystals, and you can even have ice over mainland Florida. When I was training as a pilot in Miami, we used to see cirrus. However, they had to be at least 30,000 feet high to have the ice at that latitude. And the clouds can be interesting at night, backlit by the moon as well. This was taken out of my son's bedroom window with a, I forget the lens, probably a 400mm lens. More storm clouds with distant towering cumulus. Being a pilot, I am fascinated by clouds. They certainly affected my environment when I was actively engaged in aviation. And even today, I like to look up into the sky and wonder what's going on up there with the currents and wind shears and just the overall meteorological patterns that are taking place. So this is, I believe that would be alto, sort of a lenticular stratus formation. And that was above the Richardson Highway near Pippin Lake, where the Edgerton cutoff is. This is Donnelly Dome on the Richardson Highway, south of Delta. And again, relating clouds with aviation, you might be able to see the tiny, tiny airplane, lower left center. And sunsets make magic happen. Salmon colors, various unusual shapes. blue sky, silhouetted mountains. This was on the Parks Highway near the eastern boundary of Denali Park. Same area, different transition of the clouds as they change. Similar clouds, but this was taken in the Ocean View area in South Anchorage, looking down towards Mount Redoubt, across Turnagain Arm, or the mouth of Turnagain Arm. Same area, railroad tracks included. More lenticulars. Sometimes these form almond flying saucer shaped patterns that I guess actually people have called the Weather Bureau reporting UFOs because of some of the formations these clouds can take. And our last cloud scene, we show natural clouds with man-caused clouds because contrails are actually a form of cloud shape. And we jump from the sky to my son's window pane. The kids are long gone, married. One of them's married now, but I still make use of the windows in their bedroom because sometimes we see fascinating ice patterns in the winter due to the fact that my windows are not modern, nicely sealed windows in that part of the house. So we have condensation and freezing makes these beautiful patterns. And I've developed a technique of holding the lens hood directly against the inner pane of the window to achieve perfect focus and not to have to use a tripod. Just pressing the camera against the inner window pane, provided I've got the proper amount of tubes installed, will help me to achieve perfect one-to-one focus with no vibration, handheld. Here's the apparatus that I use. And there's the window that some of these formations were taken upon. It's pretty mundane when you look at it as we see it. Of course, macro transforms it into a different world. And we transition now to the ground and the beautiful ice formations that we find on the grass. And I found that a very special time of the year is after freeze up, but before snow. And that's when the ground cover is still visible and the ice forms in damp areas like down along streams or other places where the moisture is escaping from the ground and then condenses and freezes on whatever is in the area, be it grass, leaves, twigs, rocks, whatever. And you can find many beautiful patterns as a result of just being observant. There's a leaf that I'm sure has decomposed by now. It's turned to dust, but its juxtaposition with ice makes it very interesting. Crystals have always fascinated me, be it mineral crystals or man-made crystals or frost crystals. And there's the environment these past few images were taken from. That's down at Bird Creek, right along the Seward Highway, and you can see the Seward Highway Bridge there, just beyond my loving wife and companion, and compatriot and accompanying me on many of these photo trips, be they long or short. This is a little grotto down along Turnagain Arm, a very interesting ice fall formation. This is Upper Rabbit Creek with ice that's adhered to the hanging probably alder branches with foam on the bottom. And this is one of my favorite creeks along Turnagain Arm. And again, it's that transition time between winter, or the beginning of winter and the ending of autumn. There's still autumn leaves and green moss with the forming ice. And of course, like I said, it's a very short transitional period. As soon as the snow arrives, the magic's gone as far as seeing these two seasons in one image. And you never know how the icicles are going to form. It all depends on the rising and falling of the water levels. Many, many abstract patterns, and the holes in the ice are, just as the previous lady was stating, the holes in the iceberg are so intriguing on the glacier, and likewise on streams that are newly formed with ice. You see these abstract, I call them wormholes into the past or the future, who knows? Ice shelves forming at McHugh Creek. And this one was taken with a point and shoot camera, I hate to admit. I normally use a very high resolution Nikon camera, 36 or 45 megapixel cameras, but this was probably less than 10 megapixels. And there I am in my favorite environment, trying to stay warm, but having a great time dealing with these formations, knowing that they're going to be gone just in a few days, either with the next warm up or the next snowfall. And we have to remember that all this ice in Alaska comes from snowflakes. And this one was an unusually large one, 3/16 of an inch in diameter, that I caught on a black glass plate and managed to get a pretty nicely focused rendition of it. So I do have a few people shots. This is above the Matanuska Glacier. And concerning people, I like people, like to be around people, but only if it's a few at a time. And that's why I moved to Alaska. We are so blessed up here to have the vast landscapes with residents who cherish these landscapes. It's not hard to find people who want to join us to go see these views and appreciate them and just savor the moment. So that's what we were doing here. My loving wife, who has accompanied me all over the state, both in airplanes and Volkswagen campers, hiking trips, ferry trips like here to Cordova. So we like to go up as high as we can get, as high as our feet will take us, to search out good panorama spots. And that's what we did here. Unfortunately, I didn't include the panorama here of this scene. More people. I don't know who this was. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. I'm not quite to the end of my presentation. Let's see, where am I? Beginning people. I would like to just show you, and I'm going to go real quickly to what Hal says he wanted to show. I'm becoming best known now for landscape panoramas of the aurora. And this was taken the day before Valentine's Day this year. And I like to point out, if you look at the reflection in the river, it's almost heart-shaped. So maybe that was apropos for Valentine's Day. Here's another taken up on the Richardson Highway, south of Fairbanks. Another Denali. This is sitting in a river, a tremendous arc overhead, the Big Dipper, and a shooting star. So that was a lucky night. Another Denali. And I've recently got into infrared, always pushing the limits on what can be done differently. Here I'm totally wacko in changing the colors. Infrared goes through the haze wonderfully. This is taken above Bear Valley, looking to the northwest. Falls Creek. Okay, let's do some funnies before we sign off. This one I called Return to the Mothership. It's an MD-11, and it's, of course, taxiing behind the big plane. That's the largest plane flying in the world. It's a Russian cargo aircraft out at Anchorage International. Return to the Mothership is that one. This one I called Strange Encounters in Alaska's Backcountry. You can see the expression on my wife, totally apropos for this scene. And lastly, when you're out in the woods, watch what you step on. You might change this smiling face into a scowl. Of course, these are puffballs. And traditionally, I'll end with the sunset. That's the west view of Cook Inlet, Mount Redoubt, with magical colors. Thank you very much. So long.
There's an amazing amount of work there. I wish we had all night to go through every picture that them and more, actually, because I know you got a lot of work. But thanks for sharing what you did. That was really great. So our next presenter is Graham Dane. He's a painter living in Anchorage, Alaska. He's originally from London, England. Graham will share some of his abstract paintings in a slideshow entitled The Sublime Absurdity.
All right. Firstly, thanks, Hal, for asking me to do this. Some of you might know I'm married to the artist Linda Infante Lyons, and she's always telling me that you can say anything with an English accent and it sounds intelligent. I'm just hoping that this evening will not prove her wrong. Where to start? A sublime absurdity. This is the same spot, basically, that I'm talking to you from now. It's only half of my studio. And some of the work I'm going to show you was brand new until Friday, and it was the last couple of drawings I'd produced. And today I got back in the studio after a weekend away, and I've produced another couple. But one of the reasons I decided to put this up was to show that source material is multitudinous. And I look and move around the world. I'm interested in some photography. I do a little bit myself. I would never consider myself to be anything like the photographers that produce work here. But I collect visual imagery. And I've got a couple I'll show you later, but within those boards and within a whole stack of file folders, I've got imagery that ranges from the microscopic, histological, meteorological, through to the cosmological. And I'm interested in other artists' work, both figurative and non-figurative. And I will just collect images that somehow seem to do something for me. And the concept of the sort of sublime absurdity, or the absurd sublime, is really one that's more to do with both creativity and how we think of the arts in our culture. Because I'm sure that most of the people who are, well, I'm sure that all of the people who have attended today don't have the same kind of idiotic stereotypes that our culture seems to put forward when it comes to the arts. I mean, my own father, for many years, bless his soul, he died last year, he used to continually ask me if I had a proper job yet. And once, because my first proper job in the art world was at my old art school. And I went home with a bag full of laundry, as one always did. And I was waiting for the question. He said, "Have you got a proper job yet?" And I said, "Yes, I'm working at my old art school." He said, "Oh, what are you teaching? Are you teaching drawing or painting?" And I said, "Well, I'm not teaching, Dad. I'm the life model." And he said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, I stand there buck naked and I get paid for it." And he said, You're doing what for money?" And I've always loved, that's my favorite quote from my father's 85, 89 years on the planet. And I honestly thought he was going to have a cardiac. I should have tried harder, but we were still good buddies at that point. So let me move on to these two. These are small drawings. They're 10.5 inches by 13 inches. They are mixed media, which means they are charcoal, compressed charcoal. They can be oil pastel, pencil, regular pastel, watercolor crayon, you name it. If I can draw with it, they are thrown together. And they are on photocopies of other drawings that I do. I have, this is just the smallest one, but I have sketch pads everywhere, and I am constantly drawing. And these works, and I'm only going to show you a couple. There are about 200, 250 of them. They are all a direct result of the recent pandemic and the lockdown. And just like Javid was saying, this is some of these images, they're unintentionally political, or they may not appear political, but some of the subject matter or the titles or some of the imagery that they are reactions to were highly political. And so this is the first one. They have no title at the moment other than just drawings produced during a pandemic. And I think this is number 255 or something. And this was the last one I produced on Friday before leaving. And this was finished just before. So again, exactly the same size. And these kind of shapes that appear and reappear, these loose, open geometric forms, they're something that are very fluid, but they did have a starting point. And the first two images that I produced, which would have been, I suppose, back when do you remember when we were told we were going to go into hunker down mode rather than lockdown? It sounds so much more folksy and charming, but I was very lucky. Ethan Berkowitz on Meraz he sent out an edict saying that for some reason he included art studios. They were closed to the public. And one of the great things about Alaska is you can get to know pretty much everybody fairly quickly. And my other half, Linda, wrote to Ethan. She sent him an email and she said, what are you talking about? Art studios, people don't go to them. And he wrote back saying, okay, we're going to allow art studios to open, but you're not allowed to have visitors. And so in many ways, we've been very fortunate. Linda's got a studio in Mountain View. Mine is in Spanada. It's in the now, thank God, renamed church, the Nave, formerly the Church of Love, which when you are running kids classes in something called the Church of Love, you have to do an awful lot of an explanation that you're not some kind of hippy-dippy sex cult. I swear I've had that conversations with parents more than once. Luckily, I'm never going to have it again. But the imagery, these were the first, on the left, it's the first image produced. The right, I think, was the third or the fourth. And this idea of coronavirus, we were seeing images of it. And you can see that elements are taken directly from some of these images, but they're turned into drawings. And the drawings tend to be very visceral. They're not copies. It's almost as if you're using those visual sources. And you can see I have a whole load of them behind me. They're just triggering points. They're jumping off points. It's how you react intellectually and emotionally to some of these things. And I can say with all honesty, I went from being a very figurative painter where you draw everything out, you work out your compositions, you draw, you redraw, everything is in exactly the right spot, and then you paint it, and it's finished when there's no more details to be added. While I'm painting now as an abstract painter, I can say with all honesty, half the time, I haven't got a freaking clue what I'm doing. Purely because I'm trying to make either very quick decisions and bypassing that sort of intellectual aspect. And I describe myself, my background is in art history and painting. I've been a studio painter for going on 35 years. My master's is in art history. And I always describe myself as an incredibly reluctant academic. I can do the ivory tower bullshit if I need to, but I try not to. And when I'm producing my own work, I try and bypass all that sense of I'm doing this, the self-justification. And I had a bit of an epiphany recently. I had to write a statement for a show that was held, I think, in February or March this year at the IGCA. And I equate a lot of my abstract work, and you'll see some in a minute. I'll just go through to the next one in a second. I think of abstract work, and it's not a new idea, as the visual equivalent of music. We allow music to kind of wash over us and through us, and it takes us on these incredible emotional journeys. It can trigger a sense of emotion, these memories, but it's the most abstract of all of the arts, but we accept it. And Picasso once was asked what his work means, and I describe Picasso as Picasso because I don't think he was a particularly nice man, but he once said, "Do you listen to the birds singing?" And the guy said, "Well, yes, of course I do." And he said, "Well, do you ask them what it means?" And the guy kind of shook his head. He said, "Of course not. You just listen to it and accept it for what it is." And this is where this sense of the absurdity comes in. And I'll stop at that point and move on to the next one. I'll come back to that point a little later. So this was shown last year. John Coyne, a local sculptor, put a show together called The Anthropocene, and he asked me to put a piece in. And so I was looking at my work, and I just thought one of them didn't work well, but I didn't want to put 4 pieces in. I thought that was a bit excessive. So I snuck in 4 as one piece, and I very rarely describe my work. I don't like to give too much away. I mean, there's an example I can give. It's not here. Somebody bought a painting of mine a few years ago, and they would say, "What does it mean to you?" And I would say, "Well, no, it's not important. What does it mean to you?" Because if I told them that I could see it as a nude woman with a pair of boobs, one sideways and one face on, that's all they will ever see when they look at that picture in their house. And just because I have a particular take on it doesn't mean it's necessarily the right one or even the only one. And this for me is another of the sort of absurdist aspects of being an abstract artist. It's open to interpretation. And as far as I'm concerned, if 50 people come up with 50 different interpretations of the work, I'm okay with that. Because as a friend of mine used to say, I haven't got a clue what my work is about. He said, if I ever become famous enough and my work is expensive enough and I manage to survive that long, somebody else will tell me what it means. I just like to paint it. And I can sympathize with that as well. But this is the first work I've ever really described in a bit more detail. And what's important about it is the format. Because when you're looking at those 4 pieces, what you're actually looking at visually is a swastika. And I interpreted the concept of the Anthropocene. I mean, obviously, it's a fairly important image. If anybody knows the photographer, I've forgotten his name. I'm sure it'll come back to me. But we were going through, I mean, does anybody else feel like we've just gone through 4 years of a bad relationship where we're being gaslit on a daily basis, and we've managed to sort of withdraw from it? I feel that I'm in some form of emotional, sort of political PTSD. And this was my reaction to the daily hammering that we seem to be putting up with. And so a swastika may have come from the Hindus, and it may have represented life, but in a Western culture, it's come to represent something else. And this is one of the things that I find so interesting about art and symbols. We layer meaning on these things, and whether we want it there or not, it just comes along as baggage. And for me, I often work, you can see one just behind me, it's a diptych, just a pair of paintings which is currently on the go. A diptych is a religious format, so is a triptych. And whether you intend it to or not, it will always have that sense of association, in which case, own it and use it. Some of the images that I remote, these are Ebola. And I've had these images on my wall for several years, a long time before we had to go sort of through the current lockdown. And I'm interested in them because, one, I find viruses and bacteria fascinating. They're these tiny things. They are literally microscopic, but they can have a world-changing, or certainly a personally changing effect upon you. But I will go from the tiniest of organisms through to the greatest of cosmological phenomenon for imagery. This is the Eagle Nebula. And for me, I don't copy them, but I know somehow visually or through some form of sort of visual osmosis, that these works will play a part in what I do. And so the work is always changing. The one on the left was the first session for that drawing. The one on the right, it was finished a couple of weeks ago. And I have no problems radically changing a piece of work. And this is why I say, when I begin working, I never know where the end point will be. I may well start with several small drawings. I have a couple coming up. But I try and keep a very open mind as to what the end result will be. And I don't always like my work. In fact, I look at some of my work and I think it's god awful, but it has something to it. And it's when that something comes along, you have to be open to itself. And so in some ways, we're our own worst enemies because we are hypercritical of what we do. And I find these days that if a work hasn't sold within about 5 years, it just gets whitewashed and I will redo it. I'm trying not to be precious about my work. Now, during the pandemic, as I say, I've ended up producing about 250 of these drawings. Sometimes I produce none a day. I won't finish anything. Sometimes I'll finish up to 6 or 7. And I've got a whole stack behind me that I'm working on, and they may be worked on over a day. They may be worked on over several weeks. There's no high by, it just happens. And one of the other things I started doing a couple of years ago, but I've increased, is that there's a northern tradition within art, which is allied to Caspar David Friedrich and Romanticism. And I very much see myself in that particular line. I see myself as a Northern European stroke, Northern American painter. And this idea of the Northern Romantic tradition, there's a great book out there by Robert Rosenblum, which was an extension of an essay he'd written in the early 1970s. And it looks at this, and he claims that the Romantic tradition started with Caspar David Friedrich. Eventually, artists like Mark Rothko pick it up and run with it. Now, I think there's a lot of politics involved in that because we're talking the height of the Cold War. But I think there's an element of truth. And as I was reading about this and I got more interested in this, I started looking at Northern paintings from about the 17th century, the birth of genre painting. And I started finding very specific subjects. And again, they were all related back to that earlier COVID drawing on the politics that we were living through. And I wanted very specific paintings that I felt the subject matter was appropriate. And so the two images at the top are just two quick color studies. And they're both by paintings by a Dutch artist called David Vinkbones. The top is based upon a drinking scene, and it's called The Lament of the Peasant. And underneath, there's a second scene. The same characters appear, and it's called The Peasants Revolt, where basically the wealthy patrons are being kicked out and attacked for something that they must have said or done. And so I like that idea of protest. And so I've been looking for imagery like this that I feel I can use. I like that sense of the ideological that's underlying it, but you won't see it when it gets turned into a finished painting. And so these drawings eventually would lead on to a series of works that are like this. They are a mixture of digital, of scanned drawings, photographed work, cut and recut, pasted, reworked, and then manipulated. So as such, if I was to exhibit them, I would print them. That's one. So again, these are all based upon those earlier drawings. So you can see they do get changed fairly radically. And that's the second one in that particular series after Vinkbones.
Graham, we're going to give you a couple more minutes here to wrap it up.
Oh, sure. Okay. And in fact, I'll just say this. Mark Rothko, I think of my pictures as dramas. The shapes in the pictures of the performance they've been created for the Needle Group. Rothko liked narrative, and my work works best. And I'll go through these very quickly. I won't give you the titles. They're all roughly the same size, 2x4, 3. And certain motifs, you'll see a certain shape will appear and reappear in many of them. And in some ways, I like that sense because when I see my work together, especially in a panoramic format, it's filmic. It's something that we associate with movies. And so for me, when I put work together, It's all roughly the same size. And I think of it as basically being individual scenes within a greater, wider narrative visually. Certain shapes, certain color combinations, certain marks appear and reappear, smaller, larger, recombined. And whatever the meaning is, that's up to the audience to actually find it. And I will finish on Terry Eagleton. I don't need to read it. You can read that yourselves. But the idea of the absurdist sublime is this. Art has the ability to take us way beyond ourselves to some kind of nirvanic or even meditational state. It can give us that sense of the sublime that Kant would talk to us about. But at the same time, the absurdist element is that it's very difficult to do. And it's extremely hard to do within a Western culture because we're artists, right? We are supposed to love what we do. And if we love what we do and we really enjoy it, somehow we shouldn't get paid for it. But we all have bills. And so it's a very peculiar career. It's a vocation and a career. And there's always this dichotomy that seems to be going on between the ability to survive at it and the need to make it and to continue to have the cash, the funds. And one of the things they don't teach us at art school is they teach us how to make it, but they don't teach us how to survive at it. And I think one of the great things we've seen with social media recently, particularly, this kind of thing as well, is artists are kind of leaving the gallery system behind. They are bypassing the gatekeepers, and they now have the ability to go straight out to the public through Instagram, through Facebook, through various other sites. So we are living in a paradigm-busting environment as an artist. And so it is a ridiculous thing. It's at one level totally trivial. The kind of things that Javid is dealing, in some ways, I'm embarrassed to produce work that I do. But at the same time, and this will be my last statement, art is central to everything we have and do. It very much is the case of we've always produced art for one reason or another. It goes back 30, 40,000 years. Everything that you're wearing, that you're looking, you're driving, that you're using has been designed by somebody at one level or another. And so we would live in a very poor society if artists and art was uninvented. So at one level, it seems to be an extremely important activity. And at another level, when considering other things that are going on, it's so unimportant, it's almost trivial. Hence, the sublime absurdity of what we do. Right. Thanks, Hal. I'll leave it at that.
That was all very excellent. A big virtual round of applause. Thanks to each of you for sharing your work. And we're now open for questions. So you can unmute and ask questions if you like. I'm going to look through the chat here and see if there's some questions for people in the lull. And so please keep it to questions. You can put your appreciations and accolades and congratulations into the chat window, and we'll just deal with questions. So anybody want to start out?
Yeah, I've got a question for Javid. I wondered, where do you see your work going? What do you think the next part of this story is going to be for you?
That is a very good question. I don't know, and I'm open to suggestions. I mean, Mary put it in the chat to submit it for a presentation. My goal is to get it out there to the people who potentially would change their behavior, would change their mind. That is a time-sensitive issue. People are dying. People are dying right now, and that which could have been preventable. When it started, when the pandemic started, we had no choice. We had hydroxychloroquine, that is now obsolete. We know it didn't work. That's all we had. So I hope the general public will see that. I don't know how to get the word out there, but I need to have the body of work first. But people are dying left and right, unvaccinated people. And by the way, I'm yet to see a vaccinated patient coming to the ICU. Everybody who we get has some kind of excuse not to get the vaccine, because it's been available. It's been available for 2 months to 16-year-old plus. So I don't know if you have any suggestion to get the word out there. I'm open to suggestions.
Well, it's powerful work.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I have a question for Javid also. I think I'm unmuted. I want to encourage you to proceed with this, deeply moving. And I don't think I've ever seen this information from the standpoint of a physician of any kind, particularly an ICU physician. Thank you for doing this. And such personal work, heartbreaking. Please don't feel like you need to apologize for the heaviness of some of it. We need to see this. And the heaviness, your presentation, I don't think comes across as heavy. I think you have a lightness of spirit that I can feel just through the way that you're presenting this. And I'd like to know when you do proceed with this, and I want to be able to see it, and I don't know how.
Thank you for the comments. Actually, I wasn't protecting you. Mostly, I was protecting myself. I get emotional. I have. When a patient dies, that could have been prevented. It touches every single nerve in my body. We try to restore life. That's my job. I've been trained for that. I spent a big chunk of my adulthood to be trained for this. But something bad happens. I don't know, a car accident, there's not much I can do, but this could have been prevented. But I agree with you. I think I should get it out there and hopefully make an impact. But what Hal said, that I'm in this unique position. I mean, I've seen work of other photographers, by the way, who take their cameras into the ICU rooms. I don't know how they get away with that, and I can't do it ethically. I mean, when I'm in a patient room, I want to be 100% focused. I cannot afford a tiny little step sideways and make a mistake. But and of course, I hit this roadblock with our media department that they said I can do it. But here's the irony. I can go and take care of a patient in a room. I can put a breathing tube in them exposed to the viruses, but I can't take my camera in an empty room. I'm not taking photographs of the patients. I'm just trying to recreate what happened with volunteers, with our nurses, with our respiratory therapists, with other physicians. So we'll see how far it goes. But I'm going to keep doing this because this is time sensitive and can have an impact.
Yeah, I think your use of recreation and takes it out of the kind of the gritty reality, makes it a little bit softer, a little bit easier to look at and absorb. And the use of the lens baby to get that dreamy look, takes you out of the moment, puts you in a time that doesn't necessarily logically exist. So I think you're on very good ground here. I think you're doing some very good work.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Javid, I think that the use of the lens baby, it adds so much drama to it, and the black and white. It's so dramatic, and I agree with everybody else. It's wonderful work. It's important work, and yeah, you got to get it out there. And I don't have any ideas on how to do that. I wish I did, but yeah,
Thank you.
I'm really impressed.
Thanks.
I have a quick comment. May I jump in?
Go right ahead.
So, yeah, great work by everybody. Thanks, Hal, for organizing this, and thanks for all of the presenters. It's great stuff. And I got to thinking, I'm going to take a risk here by even saying this, I'm sure, but Javid, you show a lot of humanity and a lot of heart for this subject and vulnerability as well. And I know it's a difficult subject. There's another tool we can use in addition to our creativity to help solve this problem, and that is to vote. And all the folks in Anchorage know there's an election coming up, and it's a stark choice between science and something else that I don't quite understand what it is. But I think, a healthy economy requires healthy people. And so I'm just going to go off the reservation a bit here. Excuse me, that's probably not the good reference. I'm going to jump off this the art topic and just get into the political thing. Let's all vote, man. Let's do what we can do to make the world a better and a safer place, to make Anchorage better.
Okay.
Right, thank you.
Any questions? I'll read some from the chat here, unless somebody wants to jump in.
I had a question for Myron.
Go right ahead.
Myron, I really love, I feel like working from the microscope to then going out to the kind of broader in real life big images was interesting. And I kind of wonder how your eye has changed, or your sense of perception of your environment has changed since working with the microscope.
Well, the microscope, put it this way, I love anything optical. If it's got glass and you can look through it and it changes your outlook of the world, I'm attracted to it. In fact, I collect the things, the instruments. I have books on optics that maybe one of the better collections in Anchorage, I don't know. But at any rate, I'm still a student and I'm open to discovery. And obviously the microscope takes you into a Alice in Wonderland world that certainly could attract just about anyone who really wanted to delve into it. I'm really not that interested in biological microscopy, like looking at pond water and bugs and algae and things like that. But the abstract forms that the polarizing microscope will allow one to see, certainly, yeah, that really gets my attention, and be happy to share some of those techniques with folks if they wanted to learn more about it. And there's lots on the web that talks about it also. You might mention check eBay and other online sources of instruments. There's some pretty good deals out there. So,
how do the colors play into it? Because I love the tertiary colors in the microscope world, and I kind of wonder how you translate that to real life.
The way that works is there are various forms of crystals that are lend themselves well to polarized light or polarization. Sugar and salt, actually sugar does, salt does not polarize into those colors. What you need are what's called anisotropic crystals. Vitamin C is the favorite of most microscopists. So all you do is you mix a solution of vitamin C, let it evaporate on the slide, and the polarizing microscope has a polarizing filter below the slide and another above the slide. And you can rotate one of those to get various what they call angles of extinction. You can go from a pure black background to white. And as you rotate it, these colors change like looking through a kaleidoscope. So it's sort of what you see is what you get in terms of what you choose to photograph. So you just move the stage around to get the composition like you want it. And then you twirl the filter, one of the filters, in my case, the lower filter, to get the colors you want. And then you take various exposures to bracket the exposure. And then you move on to the next one. So it's a slow, time-consuming, laborious technique, but by the same token, you can while away the hours doing it and having a lot of fun.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate that background on it. I had one more comment for Javid. Javid, even with the constraints that the media department puts on you, I think there's a lot of power to just simply a story. For example, your lens baby with the 6 or so tubing and the hands. That's the backstory of knowing how many lifelines were involved with each patient really helped me to imagine what the ICU was like. Even though I can't be there physically, I mean, I've been there before, so I can imagine what it was like to have rooms with tubes coming out of them and managing that. So see the constraints that you're given as the opportunity to create from, because it really will like lend to creating work in new ways.
Thank you. That's exactly. I mean, I attended a workshop with Sam Abel, and I learned two things from him. One of them was separation of laws, and he's OCD with separation. The second one was there are many solutions to a problem, but there's always an elegant solution, the most elegant solution. And I think the fact that I have so many roadblocks, it makes me more creative and come up with things that in a way they're abstract and impression of what's going on, but it makes me do something different, which makes it easier to publish and put it to public, because it's a small community. I mean, if I say specifics about a patient, probably half of town knows about them. But you're absolutely right. Thank you. And by the way, I should say something about the other artists. I mean, I love abstract. Hal knows about that. Every single one of the other presenters had some wonderful, wonderful abstract that I love. I mean, I could hang them on my wall, every single one of you. Thank you.
Yeah, Gail, my favorite was your whole series, because that was the most kind of fun for my brain.
Yeah, that's my favorite that I do. So thank you.
It reminded me a little bit of Georgia O'Keeffe, by the way.
So Gail, it looks like you've done a fair amount of photography at the glaciers during the winter. What differences do you find in your photography across the different seasons?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think summer is, I think, the most difficult, because you get those really bright sunny days, and those are very difficult, not only to expose properly, but just to even be able to see on the white, because it's so white and so bright. It's really difficult. Yeah, I would say that winter is, I guess the hardest thing about winter is getting out there, because the guy really wants you to take his tours. But yeah.
So I have another question from Al in Portland, Oregon. He asks about Portage Glacier, and he used to live here some years ago, and he remembers going out to Portage quite often. And he says he understands that the glacier has receded quite a lot, and he asks, what changes have you seen at Portage and other glaciers, and has this influenced how you photograph them?
Well, yes, Portage, especially when the first time I saw Portage Glacier was in 1986, and you could see the glacier from the road, and the lake was filled with icebergs, floating ice. It was very impressive, and it's changed so much. To see the glacier, you really have to go either in the when the lake is frozen, you can take your life in your hands and go out there. That's how I got a few of the photos from Portage, and I think that's going to stop after seeing the video of the folks out on the ice last year when it calved, and you could see the ice just kind of waving. So I don't think I'll be doing that anymore. Or the other thing you can do is go from Whittier and climb up and over the pass, which is a lot of good exercise. But there's not nearly as many floating icebergs as there used to be, and people who have been around for a while been in the area for a while will back me up on that. Even Matanuska's receded enough, I think. I remember the first time I saw it, seem to be much closer to the parking area.
Great, well, thanks. This question is for Myron. Are you stitching your panorama Northern Lights pictures? And if so, how are you getting such excellent stitches with moving Northern Lights?
Good question. I have been doing panoramas since 1983. Didn't start doing the Aurora panoramas until 2015. And the reason for that was film was too slow. The cameras did not have the dynamic range they do now. But after I bought my first Nikon D 800 with the 36 megapixel sensor, my wife and I were up on the Brooks Range, up on the Dalton Highway in 2015, and we had a fairly strong windstorm going as weather systems were changing. Pardon me, we were at Finger Mountain and the Aurora came out, and I thought, this won't work. It's too windy. It's going to shake the tripod. So I took the camera around behind the potty, concrete potty that was located at Finger Mountain, found a lee spot in the wind, and started doing single shots. And I said, well, will panorama work? And so I started doing multiple frames that would later be stitched. And sure enough, they stitched beautifully. And ever since then, I've found that probably 95% of the Aurora, the standing arcs, or the arcs, the auroral arcs are stationary enough that you can get by with sometimes 10-second individual exposures stitched together. In fact, I've done whole 360s of them using a 14 millimeter lens. And so all I can say is, yes, it works, amazingly enough. Of course, with it, most of the Aurora that I've done are fairly stationary. When you get into the pulsating or the violently changing Aurora, thank you, you won't get it all. They won't all stitch, but it's well worth doing it anyway, because you'll get a very high percentage of success by just trying it. So to answer your question, yes, it can be done. I use vertical frame stitches, portrait mode, and usually for a 180, I'll do maybe 6 or 8 individual frames. For a 360, 12 or more, depending on the focal length of the lens. So get out and try it.
If there's no more questions, next month, June 7th, 6 p.m., tune in to hear from and see work by photographer and mixed media artist Tammy Phelps, sculptor and mixed media artist Sheila Wine, commercial photographer Jeff Schultz, and photographer and mixed media artist Mark Dottie. We'll end this meeting, as we always do, with a traditional hand wave and a sign off from everyone. So thank you and goodbye.
Bye.